A lot of people talking about this growing outrage today over a report that school districts around the nation are spending millions of tax dollars on courses training teachers about so-called white privilege. Pittsburgh alone spent nearly $600,000 on the training. The courses are offered by the controversial Pacific Educational Group, which teaches schools to treat white and minority students differently. According to the report, the organization, quote, teaches black kids are less likely to respond to fundamental ideas like working hard to achieve success or being on time for school or work because those ideas are supposedly foreign to African American culture. You know what? Juan Williams put this best. This is tragically insulting. But more importantly, and Jedediah, I'm going to come to you first because you spent a lot of years in academia. More importantly, this breaches the learning process.
Oh, sure. I mean, this is when people talk about throwing money at education. The liberals will always say, well, we need to devote more money to education. Why? So we can do more of this and kids can come out and still not learn how to read and write. This is horrible. You're grouping, first of all people of a race into one group as if all white people, all African American people act the same. Kids come from different households. They have different backgrounds. They're all going to respond differently. This is absurd. And also, you're setting up the expectation of failure for some students. You're telling them basically, well, we expect you to not arrive to class on time because you're African American and you have some cultural link to that. That is absolutely insane. I think parents should complain. And even if you're not a parent, I would urge you to complain about this because this is tax dollars. Everybody is paying for this nonsense. Complain about it.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I looked at some of the other school districts that are listed. One of the top participants in terms of spending tax dollars on this is Baltimore County.
Right. Yep.
I'm wondering if this doesn't divide us even more as a nation.
Yeah, Baltimore was up there. The biggest spender on the list was Pittsburgh Public Schools, $586,000 over a 4-year period. Second was a school district in Minnesota, $533,000. We're not talking about pennies here. We're talking about a lot of money for a very controversial message, Harris.
Right. Yeah, and you know, Andy, I'm just curious, what are we getting out of this? I mean, Jedediah talked about the fact that by separating kids out, you're not teaching any of them, really.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that that stuff is utter nonsense, but there are a couple of other issues here. I guess the first one is the question of whether or not you believe overall that white privilege is a real thing.
Do you believe it is?
I do. I absolutely do. And I want to quote from, it was EG News is the conservative outlet that broke this story.
Kyle Olson is their publisher.
Yes. And I want to quote from them. They say, on a basic level, this course teaches that minority students don't do as well as white students on the average because traditional American education is structured around white cultural norms, which are frequently difficult for minority students to grasp. EG News goes on to say, reasonable people might see value in that idea. It makes sense for teachers and other educators to be more aware of the various cultural influences and traditions that shape the mentality of the students. I completely agree with that. That, to me, is wholly separate from saying that, oh, well, black kids aren't taught to work hard or aren't capable of working hard. That stuff is insane and should be gotten rid of. I don't think that ruins the thing overall.
Differences and treating people differently based on this. I thought our culture was American.
Well, and that's the problem, right? And specifically in Baltimore, one of the major complaints over the past couple of weeks with the protests and the riots is that there is not a connection between the school districts or the police to the community, to the African American community, right? Well, when you're teaching in schools that disconnect and you're promoting that disconnect, then how can you expect there to ever be any kind of understanding when they're teaching it this way? Also, too, you know, these are the same school districts with the same officials who are complaining about not having money for things like textbooks and after-school programs and desks, and they complain about bigger class sizes for students that are not getting enough attention. Well, maybe if we weren't spending $600,000 on a program that divides students and doesn't bring them together, maybe you would have money for things that are essential to the academic process.
And the kids feel that division early on. I mean, we're trying to bring people together. Kids are very smart. They pick up on a lot of stuff. They feel that you are dividing that classroom based on race early on. What do you think that means as they grow older and then they become part of society? They've had that in their minds now, from school no less, from a young age. Horrible.
I just know that globally, when they compare our country to others when it comes to things like math and science, they take an average of everybody in the school system, not just the whites, not just the blacks, not just kids outside of both those races. We're in it together. We'll move on. The NFL may have a big decision to make. What to do after investigation found that Tom Brady probably generally knew The air had been let out of some of the footballs during a championship game. The fallout the star quarterback could face and the impact on his legacy. Calls to punish him getting a little bit louder now, and of course the song. I love that.